The wind rolled across the high plains like it had something to say, tugging at coats and carrying dust, the way gossip travels in a small frontier town. And when Clara Mae asked the question, it came just as sharp and sudden as a rattler's strike. "You still love her, don't you?" she said, soft but steady. Standing there on the porch of the Rocking R Ranch with the sunset bleeding red over the hills, Luke Tanner froze mid-step, his hand still on the worn doorframe. A man who had faced stampedes and gunfire, yet now felt his chest tighten over 7 simple words. Luke had always believed the past was a thing you could outride if you pushed your horse hard enough. Leave it choking on dust behind you. But the name Clara didn't say out loud hung between them anyway, heavier than the storm clouds building far off. Emily Rose Harper, the woman who once owned his heart before fate and fear tore it loose. The woman who left town on a northbound train 10 years ago. And now Clara Mae was looking at him like she already knew the answer, like she was braced for it. The ranch creaked around them, old pine boards popping as the evening cooled, the smell of leather and hay drifting up from the barn. Luke's jaw worked as he stared out across his land, acres of hard-won soil and stubborn grass, every fence post driven by his own blistered hands. Clara Mae had helped with some of those posts too, laughing with sweat on her brow, and the thought that he might lose her now twisted something deep in him. He remembered the first time Clara Mae rode onto his property, dust-coated and fearless, asking for work with eyes that didn't flinch at his scars or his silence. She had patched his knuckles, argued with him over cattle prices, stood beside him at church socials like she belonged there, and now she was asking the one thing he had never let himself say out loud, whether the ghost of another woman still lived in him. Luke finally turned back to her, the sun catching in his dark hair, his face lined by years of sun and regret. "Not since you," he said, the words coming out rough but true, and when he spoke them he felt something shift inside, like a gate finally swinging open after years of rust. Clara Mae searched his face, looking for the lie she feared might be hiding there, but all she found was a man stripped bare by honesty. Still, the past did not loosen its grip, so Luke's mind drifted back to a younger version of himself, riding beside Emily Rose along the riverbank, her laughter ringing bright as silver bells. They had planned a future once, talked about a house and children, but dreams had a way of dying slow out here. Emily wanted more than dust and cattle, and Luke had been too proud and too afraid to ask her to stay. Clara Mae knew pieces of that story. Everyone in town did, but she didn't know the nights Luke spent staring at the ceiling, wondering what might have been, and she didn't know how meeting her had slowly crowded those thoughts out, replacing them with something steadier and stronger. Love that didn't burn hot and fast, but held like a banked fire through winter. As the stars began to prick the sky one by one, Clara Mae stepped closer, her hand brushing his sleeve. Not possessive, but seeking reassurance. Luke covered her fingers with his own, calloused and warm, and for the first time in years he felt certain. The road ahead was not haunted by old regrets, but shaped by the woman standing beside him, though neither of them knew yet that the past was already riding back toward the Rocking R. Carried on the wheels of a train, and the promise of unfinished business. Morning came slow and pale over the Rocking R Ranch, the kind of dawn that looked gentle, but carried trouble in its quiet. Luke Tanner was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed with his boots on, staring at the floor while Clara Mae still slept behind him, her breathing even and soft, and for a moment he let himself believe the words he'd spoken the night before had settled everything. That saying, "Not since you had shut the door on the past for good." Yet the unease in his gut told a different story, because the past had a way of circling back, like a stray dog that remembered where it once belonged. And Luke felt it now as he stepped outside into the cold, the sky stretching wide and empty above him, like it was waiting to see what choice he would make when the time came. Town was busier than usual by mid, wagons creaking, voices carrying, a low buzz of something new hanging in the air. Luke felt it before he heard it. The way folks paused when he passed, the way eyes flicked toward the train tracks and then back to him, and when he finally saw the thin column of smoke rising in the distance, his chest tightened. The northbound train was due today, the same line that had carried Emily Rose Harper away all those years ago, and the coincidence sat heavy and wrong. Luke tied his horse outside the general store and stepped inside, the bell jangling overhead, only to be met with silence that spoke louder than words, until old Mr. Calder cleared his throat and said, "Luke, you might want to hear this from someone who ain't trying to stir trouble." Emily Rose Harper stepped off the train wearing a coat to find for this town, and a look that mixed hesitation with resolve. She had changed, and yet she hadn't. Her hair was pinned up now, her eyes older but still sharp, and when she spotted Luke across the platform, something flickered across her face that looked an awful lot like relief. Luke felt the ground tilt under his boots as memories crashed into him full force. The riverbank, the promises, the night she told him she was leaving, and for a heartbeat he forgot where he was. Forgot Clara Mae and the life he'd built, until Emily said his name, and the sound of it pulled him back into the present like a rope around the waist. Word traveled faster than the train ever could, and by the time Luke rode back to the ranch, the news had already reached Clara Mae. She didn't confront him right away. She never did things the easy way. Instead, she waited until evening, until the work was done and the shadows stretched long. Then she asked him what he was going to do, not accusing, not pleading, just asking. And Luke realized then how different she was from Emily. How Clara Mae faced things head on while Emily had always chased what lay beyond the horizon. Luke told her the truth, that Emily was back and that he didn't know why yet. And the look in Clara Mae's eyes cut deeper than anger ever could, because it held fear mixed with trust. A trust he knew he could shatter if he chose wrong. Emily wasted no time seeking him out. She came to the ranch the next afternoon, her boots clean, her hands standing on the same porch where Clara Mae had asked her question, and Luke felt like the land itself was holding its breath. Emily spoke of her life back east, of loss and disappointment, of a husband who drank and dreams that never took root. She said she had come back to see if there was still something here for her, something she'd been too young and restless to fight for before. And as she talked, Luke saw the woman he'd once loved layered over the stranger she had become, and he understood then that loving someone once did not mean they stayed the same forever. Clara Mae watched from a distance as Emily left, her face calm but her heart anything but. She told herself she trusted Luke, that a man who could say, "Not since you meant it," but doubt has a way of creeping in when the past comes calling with familiar eyes and old stories. That night Clara Mae lay awake listening to Luke's breathing, wondering if love was ever truly safe on a frontier built on change and loss. She thought of all she had given him, her time, her strength, her quiet loyalty, and she wondered if it would be enough. When weighed against a first love returned from the dead, Luke felt torn in two. One part of him angry at Emily for leaving and then daring to come back. Another part aching with the knowledge that some chapters never close as neatly as we want them to. He walked the fence line until his legs burned, thinking of Clara Mae's steady presence and Emily's restless spirit, and he realized the choice before him wasn't between two women, but between two versions of himself. The man he used to be, chasing dreams he didn't understand, and the man he had become, rooted, scarred, and capable of a deeper kind of love. As a storm rolled in from the west, thunder muttering like an old warning, Luke stood alone under the darkening sky and made a promise to himself. He would not let the past decide his future. Whatever Emily had come back for, he would face it honestly and finish what had been left undone, because Clara Mae deserved certainty, and so did he. And as the first drops of rain hit the dust and turned it to mud, Luke knew the days ahead would test every word he had spoken on that porch, and only truth would carry him through the storm. The rain did not stop with the night. It settled in like it meant to stay, soaking the land and turning every trail into a ribbon of mud. And Luke Tanner rode through it anyway, his hat pulled low, his thoughts louder than the thunder, because the promise he had made himself could not wait for clear skies. Emily Rose Harper had asked to see him one last time, said there were things that needed saying before she decided her next step. And Luke knew avoiding her would only leave old wounds festering. He found her at the small boarding house near the tracks, sitting by a window, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears she refused to shed. And when she looked up at him, there was no romance left in her eyes, only a tired honesty that matched his own. They talked for a long time, about the years apart, about the mistakes they both made, about how love can feel urgent and true, and still not be enough to build a life on. Emily admitted she had come back chasing a memory, not a future. And Luke admitted that for a moment he had been afraid that memory still owned him, but speaking it aloud stripped it of its power. He told her about Clara Mae, not just that he loved her, but how she had changed him, grounded him, made him a better man. And Emily listened with a sad smile that carried more relief than heartbreak. When she finally stood to leave, she took his hands and said she was glad he had found what she never could hear. And in that moment, Luke felt the last thread tying him to the past finally snap. Not with anger, but with understanding. Clara Mae did not wait on the porch this time. She was in the barn, sleeves rolled up, hair loose. Mending tack-like work could quiet her thoughts. Luke watched her for a moment before speaking, taking in the strength and grace she carried so naturally. And when he told her everything, about the meeting, about Emily's decision to leave town again, about his own fear and certainty, Clara Mae listened without interrupting, the silence stretching between them heavy but not hostile. When he finished, she set the leather aside and asked him one question, not about Emily, but about himself, whether he was choosing her because she was safe or because he truly loved her. And Luke answered without hesitation, saying he chose her because, with her, he was fully himself. No running, no chasing, just standing firm. The storm cleared by morning, leaving the land washed clean and bright, and word spread just as quickly as it had before. Emily Rose Harper boarded the train again, this time heading west, chasing something new, or perhaps just peace. Luke and Clara Mae stood together on a rise overlooking the tracks, not watching the train but watching the horizon beyond it, understanding that closure did not always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it came quietly, with a shared breath and the decision to keep walking forward together. Clara Mae slipped her hand into Luke's, and this time there was no question in her touch, only certainty. Days turned back into routine, fences repaired, cattle counted, meals shared at the rough wooden table that had seen its share of silence and laughter. Yet something between them had shifted, deepened. Luke found himself noticing the small things, the way Clara Mae hummed while she worked, the way she argued her point with calm logic that usually won. And he realized love like this was not loud or dramatic, it was built in moments, in showing up every day even when it was hard. And Clara Mae felt it too, the difference in the way Luke looked at her now, like a man who knew exactly where he stood and where he was going. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the plains gold, Luke took Clara Mae back to the porch where it had all begun, the board still worn, the view still wide and unforgiving. He spoke of the future in a way he never had before, not vague hopes but real plans, expanding the ranch, building a proper house, facing whatever storms came side by side. And when he asked her to stay with him, not just as a partner in work but in life, Clara Mae did not hesitate. She said yes with a smile that held both joy and resolve. Knowing love on the frontier was never easy, but believing it was worth the risk. The town noticed the change. How Luke laughed more, how Clara Mae carried herself with new confidence, how the rocking hour felt less like a lonely outpost and more like a home. And though memories of Emily Rose Harper faded into the background like old tracks erased by rain, they were not forgotten. They became part of the story that led Luke and Clara Mae to each other. Proof that the past could shape you without owning you, that first love could teach without defining what came next. On a quiet night, under a sky full of stars, Clara Mae rested her head on Luke's shoulder and asked him softly if he ever regretted what had been. Luke looked out over the land, over everything he had fought for and chosen, and answered with the same truth he had found along the way. That regret had its place, but it no longer lived in his heart, not since her. And as the wind moved gently through the grass like a blessing, they stood together, knowing some loves fade into memory while others, once chosen, endure like the open range itself.